I am Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. This week on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, half of humanity is on lockdown, but you are not alone. This week we bring you two great interviews to help you through these trying times. Up first, it's politics and a conversation with CNN political analyst and author of Fault Lines, Julian Zelizer. In our second half hour, I promise you an interview you won't want to miss when I talk with one of the most revered writers of our day about his brand new book, Devoted, Dean Koontz. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show podcast is available at hallicasserjayne.com on all your favorite apps and on your Alexa device too. We begin with CNN political analyst, historian, and author Julian Zelizer. Consider the erosion of trust in government and in the economy that characterized the emerging mindset of the 1970s. Consider the emerging conservative movement, a backlash against the changes of the 1960s. All this followed by the rise of the religious right and the new right, and progressive social activists who opposed the rightward direction mobilized to defend and expand the legacies of the New Deal and Great Society. And what do you get? The clash that continues to this day, the fault lines that led to the earthquake called Donald Trump that has shaken, rocked, and rolled American politics. All explored in the book, Fault Lines, co-authored by Princeton University historian and CNN political analyst Julian Zelizer and Kevin Kruse. Let's talk with Julian Zelizer. Well, Julian, finally. I feel like you're my best friend. I talk to you every day on Twitter. It's incredible. And here we are finally getting to talk, and I'm so thrilled. You know, I've had Kevin, your co-author of Fault Lines, on the show.
Yes. Nice
to have the other half.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Maybe the better half. I don't know. We're about to find out. Anyway, let's get started on are we living in crazy times or what? Every day I sigh.
Nothing can quite match this. And there's nothing like crazy times when there is no end in sight. The combination is a pretty difficult thing to get through.
Yeah. So I always start these days asking the people at the other end of the line, how are you doing? How are things? You know, we're fellow New Jerseyites. I'm from Bergen County, and we're getting hammered up there. I'm in Florida now, but how you doing? How are things in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, we're all right. We actually live in New York, but we're out of the city. We left as this broke, and fortunately, everyone's healthy, and everyone's trying to find a routine within one house, and we're getting along. But obviously, the top priority is to keep everyone healthy right now and not to spread anything. And so on that front, we're doing okay.
Yeah, it's you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do. I'm down in Florida where it's la la land, but we'll talk about that probably as we go along here. Here's the deal. I wanted to start with your book title, Fault Lines. My audience knows it. I'm thinking Fisher at this point. I think we've moved past fault line. Could the divisions in this country be any worse than they are right now? And I want to talk to you in terms of the pandemic, because when you get to a pandemic and it's this crazy, it's this broken, it's this divided, even in the midst of something like that, even like down here in Florida where the governor where we have the highest, senior rate, he didn't care, it's politics. Talk to me about that. How does this get to be this in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing whenever we have a major stress test in recent years, and there's been nothing like this, we wonder, will something bring the nation together? And we had that conversation with 9/11, and 9/11 temporarily brought us together. But the political divisions resurfaced very quickly within a few months over key issues. And with the pandemic, this of anything should unite it, because it's a common experience. It's a common set of anxieties that we are all facing. To pretend otherwise is just an illusion. But you can see the same partisan politics already playing out from day one, in the way different governors have reacted, in the way that different news outlets have covered what the threat is, and in the way the president has handled this. He continues to play to the base and doesn't really divert from a lot of his strategy. So you see how embedded this politics is, that it's even a pandemic of this magnitude can't totally shake our political system from where it's been.
Tell me one thing, from a historical political point of view, that's what you do. How
Yes.
is it that this man plays this playing to the base? It doesn't even make sense to me. Had he come into office and he'd brought everybody in, think how different it could have been, and how much smarter it would have been, and how much bigger he's limited himself to where he can go politically, in the numbers.
Yeah, I mean,
What is that?
Part is strategy, part is him. The strategic part would be he's someone who understands he'll never be able to win over any significant part of the country that didn't like him from day one. And he's playing to the fault lines that we're talking about and accepting them and just trying to solidify all his support in red state America, period. And that he's abandoned the old presidential goal of coalition building. The other is this is him. There's nothing strategic about it. And the person we keep seeing over and over in moments of peace and prosperity and moments of recession, it looks like, and pandemic, it's the same person. He can't help himself. And increasingly, it really feels to me that it's the latter. And playing to the base is just the kind of politics he's capable of. It's not necessarily a grand strategic vision that he has.
What about the people who are listening to him? In history, the Civil War, I had Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's a frequent guest on the show. We were talking about it a few weeks ago, and she said to me, "Now, calm down, Halli. It's not as bad as the Civil War." But now people are dying because of his politics.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, a few weeks ago, I would have probably been saying the same thing. But now we're talking of projections, serious ones from the administration of 100 to 200,000 people dying of this. That's from the administration. And so it is a kind of, it's not a civil war, but it's a war against the disease that is having devastating effects right now on our human life and on our economic life, and simply in our vision of what the country is. This won't go away. We're going to be scarred for a generation at least. So I do think we're now talking Civil War, Great Depression moment for this country.
And that manifests how?
Well, it manifests itself in just sheer devastation. The numbers every morning when you wake up of people who have just died. This is reminiscent of Vietnam, when there was a body count and people would see every month just how many soldiers were deceased. But this isn't even soldiers. This is people right here. It's family members, friends. It's kind of a magnitude that's different. And then on the economy, we have an economy that is shut down for the foreseeable future. And it's not as if this just quickly recovers. You can't stimulate an economy that's closed. So I think that's another way in which this is depression-like. And finally, I always talk about people in the Depression, that generation. They never forgot the bottom falling out, and they never forgot what could happen at any moment. And I'm sure that not only the older generations, but the millennials and even Generation Z, they're always going to remember this. And that is scarring. So on all three levels, that's why we're talking about a crisis. It's not exaggerated to say this is a historic, unprecedented moment we're living through.
But I have to say this. It's interesting to me. The one thing that we aren't seeing and makes this kind of obscure is so far we're really not seeing body bags. A couple of nurses have been able to film hallways in hospitals. But if you think about it, there's no real visual here at this point. And I think that's a lot of, I live in Florida. I live in right-wing country. Mm-hmm. All they ever heard was his first, it's no worse than the flu. Don't worry about it. There is such denial down here as we get to, I think we're number 4 at this point, and it's growing, every day in who's sick and who's dying. But there is no visual.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. And if people could see what doctors and nurses tell you personally, who I think that part of this would be very different for people throughout the country to actually see what's happening. I do think, it changes quickly. I live in New York City, and really a few days, not only a few weeks before the city and the state really was shut down, people had a similar attitude. I mean, you saw people in restaurants. I remember walking through the streets on a Thursday night, and the bars were absolutely packed. And I think, people didn't imagine what's coming. And I think people in states that haven't been hit as hard yet are going to see this. I mean, I do think two things are changing. One are the celebrities and well-known people who are getting it. I do think that matters. These are people we know or we follow or watch. And I think that's the kind of person who suffers, who can have the effect of kind of spreading a kind of fear or warning about what this is. And I do think more people are starting to have friends or family members, even if they don't live in Florida or whatever state, who have this. And as that happens, I do think it changes. And then obviously when governors finally react, as happened in New York and New Jersey, then you feel the full weight of what this is about.
I want to get to the people. It's interesting. I was looking through some stuff from my late mother, and I found all sorts of things that she had from back in the day, World War II. She was out selling war bonds because that was something you did back in the day. Victory gardens. Mm-hmm. I wonder about who we are. Just us regular folks, rising to the occasion. My parents were the greatest generation. I don't get that feeling. I don't get that we're all in this together thing, and that upsets me greatly, I have to tell you. I'm curious as to what you think. Are we a failed generation somehow? We certainly. I'm a little older than you are, but we got out there and we marched.
Yeah,
now there's silence in a way. There's not this great get together.
I mean, part of it is the nature of this crisis, in that it forces us to abandon some of the social capital and social networks that in moments like World War II or the 1960s made us great. It's the getting together, it's the demonstrating and acting, and we're kind of unable to do that right now. So some of it's the particularity of what we're going through. But the things we talked about earlier, the slowness of the response, the denial, the decisions to go to spring break or Mardi Gras as the news was getting clear, or governors who refused to this day to shut down their states, that doesn't make us the greatest generation. So I guess the question for me is, where are we in a year or two? Does that part of our body politic emerge? I do think there's segments we're seeing the greatest generation. We're seeing it in the hospitals. We're seeing it in the labs right now. And I do think in parts of the population that are shut down and just learning to live with this, which is very, very hard, especially if you're not economically secure, there are pockets of greatness. And we're hoping that spreads, because that's essentially what we're going to need to withstand and then survive and rebuild after this.
But there's Facebook, there's Twitter. I mean, my goodness, Trump is number one on Facebook.
Yeah.
Couldn't we at least do that? I mean, I don't see a lot of people coming together. I still see a lot of fractious crazy on Twitter.
Yeah.
Through all of this. Yeah. And that makes me very, very sad. What are you thinking about his daily briefs? We had FDR in the fireside chats, and we have Trump talking. He's number one on Facebook every day at 5:00. What's your feeling about his handling of it in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a miserable example of leadership. It's even as a political historian and an analyst who's always talking about politics, I'm stunned each time I watch. I mean, it is clear that he's used this to, replace the rallies that he can't have right now. But the most damaging part of this is they're not really even intended to calm the nation. They're just they've been a source of disinformation, which has set us back several steps each time the governors try to push us forward. So I don't know how you handle it. I don't know if you cover part of it or don't cover it at all. But this is the opposite of the fireside chats. Those are meant to calm. Those are meant to give people a sense. FDR wanted to give a sense of what was happening and what was the plan to solve it. This is just purely politics and politics of disinformation. So they're actually harmful.
Let's get to election 2020, because it is here, and it's very interesting, don't you think, how this is all being handled or not handled. I'm curious as to what you think in terms of how even the DNC is handling it. We'll get to the individual candidates and that kind of thing in a second, but I'm concerned. I'm greatly concerned. I don't think that the Dems are doing what they need to do. They're not creative enough yet. I'm curious as to what you think.
Oh, yeah, they're fumbling and stumbling. I don't think they know what to do. I mean, their front runner has not kind of found a way to really effectively be a presence during this. I assume they will find that way, but I think it's been very hard. He's been kind of absent. I think Democrats as a party have been relatively silent on what to do. They need to find ways to draw media attention, not only to the criticism of the president, but how they think this should be handled right now. Key figures like Pelosi and Schumer are really not front and center at all. The only Democrats, I think, who have a voice right now are obviously the governors. And I mean, Governor Cuomo is the face of the Democratic Party right now. You would think he's running for president just because he's out there so much. But the Democrats have to figure this out. Ironically, this is a moment of big government response to a crisis. So you'd think Democrats naturally could find a way to be talking about this, but they're not.
Yeah, I know, excuse me, I know that Biden has tried to do a podcast. He's got his little studio down in his basement that he talks about. It's a media issue too, though, isn't it? Because the media isn't helping. I think the media should be visiting him more and often than they are, because he is the leading candidate right now. And Bernie, of course. So yeah, they're stuck too on Trump.
They are. I mean, and as someone who's in the media, I know in the last 3 weeks, the focus on politics has been almost absent. The radio, the TV, I mean, everyone has shifted to covering the crisis naturally, but they want to interview doctors, they want to interview local officials and people and find out what's going on. But the cost has been politics right in the middle of a primary going into the summer of a major historic presidential election. And so there's just not a lot of time or space, whether that's right or wrong, to cover anyone other than the administration. So in that way, it really sets up an advantage for President Trump in terms of the media, and it makes it hard for Biden or Sanders to get any kind of serious coverage right now.
Interesting. Biden was in charge of getting Obamacare passed at the time. He also worked on the other, not pandemic, but viruses that were the scourge during their time in office. Just on that alone, and his own experience, it seems to me the media would have gone to him and said, talk. You know, what was your experience? What would you recommend to the president? I know there's some talk about him talking to the president now. God, I think that's the first time Julie and I ever called Trump president. I try not to. Oh, bad. But yeah, there's something wrong there because he is a voice. He is a person of experience. So you question the media, and the media is maybe something we should talk about in a larger sense in all of this too. Historically, I find them incredibly ineffective at this time. Now, I know there's a lot of changes going on because of being on, the internet and stuff like that, and, papers dying by the dozens every couple of days. But what's your thought on the media? Is the media doing its job?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm less critical. I mean, I see all the holes of the media. I see all the things that headlines that are written that shouldn't be written, and the stories that are missed that shouldn't be missed. But right now, I'll tell you, other than a few governors, the only place to get any real information about what's going on, it's certainly not the White House, and it is pockets of the media. I think right now, at this moment, there are a lot of reporters who are doing very good work trying to just walk people through what the facts are. And that's hard when you have the president who is constantly trying to not only spin the story, but literally manufacture the story. So overall, I'm not one who's totally displeased, but I see all the problems. I mean, I do think they haven't really figured out it's a big apparatus, but they haven't figured out a way to handle this and the election at the same time. And the election meaning covering what the other party is doing. And my only final thought on that, it's not going to change right now. So I think really the burden is on Democrats to figure out a way to work in this media environment and get some attention. And that's not being political. The stakes are enormous. And right now the party needs to make its case and find a way to get that media to turn their way.
It also is, if they don't, their voice, the whole way this country was set up is for the two sides to be able to counter each other and throw out ideas and find the one in the middle that works. And that's not what's going on here. That's a big issue. If you go back to the virus itself, you're getting one set of ideas and the others aren't being heard.
That's exactly right. Biden spoke about this in January already. And Pelosi had spoken about it, and the Democratic side was more aggressive early on. Had we had room for both voices and had we have more attention, and that counts right now, you could see what a difference it will make. And that's where you see the governors having an effect. Democratic governors are countering the president's message very aggressively. And when they do, that makes a difference. It has changed the policies in certain states in ways the president just wasn't paying attention. So we need the two-party competition. It's actually healthy in a pandemic like this to have that going on. The fault lines can serve a purpose. So we're there's two different, we don't like the fractiousness, and the divisions can also be paralyzing, but there's also value to having an environment where you can at least hear what different sides have to say right now.
Interesting. One thing did happen yesterday that I thought might play into something that will be, if we ever get to the election, I want to talk to you briefly about that. Excuse me. And healthcare. Democrats suggested opening up the Obamacare exchanges so that people who aren't covered will get covered. The Republicans are hell-bent on stopping that and on killing, or containing Medicaid. Seems to me that if we should survive, all of us, to November, this is a conversation to be had. Even Bernie's, Medicare for all stance. So there is that out there for them to take advantage of. I think that opening came yesterday. But let's talk Andrew Cuomo for a minute. And his brother Kruse. Did you see Kruse last night by any chance?
Saw of it this morning.
Oh my gosh, isn't that just a nightmare?
Yes.
That when you were talking, I was thinking about that, about people in public figures telling their experience. That's the most visual anybody's given us on all of this, teeth chattering and breaking caps. But there's talk about bringing Andrew Cuomo in because Biden's not strong enough. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I have heard that. Brokered convention, if a convention actually takes place, and somehow he's nominated and switched out. I can't imagine that happening. It's hard, although we do live in a period of politics where I probably shouldn't say that anymore.
Anything's possible, right?
Anything's possible. We don't even know what the election's going to look like. We don't know what the convention's going to look like. I think it just points, what it does point to, in addition to the relative strength of Cuomo versus Biden right now, it's just, I think, a yearning among Democrats to have a Democrat do what Cuomo is doing, have Biden do what Cuomo is doing. Obviously, he's governor, so he has a different kind of platform, but he has found a way not only to get media attention, but to convey a kind of gravitas and sense of vision, a realistic sense of vision that I think a lot of Democrats want. They want Biden to do that. And I don't think there'll be a replacement. But again, I don't really know. I've never seen this kind of situation before in an election year.
Yeah, I think I at one point tweeted, somebody said, I wish that Biden had the excitement, brought the excitement to the election. And I said, you know what? The last thing this country needs right now is excitement.
Right.
We need a measured voice. I want a measured voice. I, who am very excitable, want a measured voice. I'm sure there are a lot of other people who feel the same way that I do. Has there ever been a time in history where the election itself was under duress, like it couldn't take place?
No, the closest is 1918, the midterms, when the flu, the Spanish flu, as it was called, was really ravaging the country. There wasn't a question, though, if it was going to take place. There were changes made to the actual procession or the actual procedures on voting day, trying to keep people away and clean. But what's remarkable is we don't close down our elections. We didn't do it that year. We didn't do it during wars. We are incredibly devoted to making sure that day happens. And this is the first time where there's these serious discussions, which I don't think are going to happen. But, what if there's either no election or what if there's an election where no one can really turn out? We have not had that before.
Well, there's vote by mail.
Well, that's urgent. That's an urgent issue.
And I don't understand why that's not being, absolutely slammed into people's faces. This is what we must do to prepare. What did Trump say? I'm sorry. We're on a little delay here. I was going to say that Trump yesterday balked at that. Of course, he said the Republicans would lose every election if that happened state by state. I thought that was interesting.
If more people could vote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's no excuse for that. I mean, right now, I wrote something for CNN. There is no reason that we should not be pushing full steam ahead in the states to get universal mail set up, meaning it should be easy to do. The processing issues need to be handled. We need to have assurances that votes won't easily be discounted. Any kind of barrier should be eliminated. And they have to do it now. They can't wait till September or October, because it's very easy to foresee a situation where voting just isn't going to be possible in high numbers, and we won't have a traditional voting day. And that would depress turnout greatly. So, I don't know. I'm amazed how little we have heard. It's yet another crisis within this crisis that we wait too long to deal with.
Yeah, we always seem to be up behind the eight ball in this country these days. I'm not sure what that's about. Listen, I don't know where we go from here. I think there's a lot up in the air. How many casualties from the virus, what Trump does next. Does the fault line that became a deep fissure turn into an out-and-out earthquake that devastates America? Any bets as we close? Any thoughts as we close?
Look, I mean, I'm not optimistic we come together. I'm not optimistic the dysfunction of our politics goes away after this. But I do, as an American historian, and maybe it's too optimistic, but I do see our ability to endure crises at different key moments. And I've taught about them and I've written about them. So now we're living through one. So I have to just kind of pull into the hope of what I've seen in the past to imagine that the greatest generation, which might not be apparent right now, or it's just apparent in parts of the country, that it does come together. And even if we're still divided, and even if we still fight, hammer and tong politically, that people are getting ready now and in some places doing exactly what needs to be done to slow this down.
Julian, thanks so much for being here. Come back
Thanks
soon.
for having.
Sure thing. I've been speaking with Princeton University historian, CNN analyst, and the co-author of Fault Lines, Julian Zelizer. Find him on Twitter at Julian Zelizer and on CNN's website as well. The book, very much worthy of a read, can be purchased at Amazon.com. You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and on all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say, The Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Never afraid to go where no writer has gone before, Dean Koontz has just published his new book, Devoted, another action-based cerebral thriller that tests the imagination of his readers. In a time when truth is stranger than fiction, Devoted is the perfect diversion and proof that only a master storyteller can outwit truth. Koontz praises a literary juggler for his deft ability to blend other genres into his acclaimed suspense thrillers, has had 14 of his novels land number one on the New York Times bestseller list, making Koontz one of only a dozen writers to have hit that milestone. His books are available in 38 languages and have sold more than 500 million copies to date. That's the writer. Who is the man? Let's talk with author Dean Koontz.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, and how are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking. Good to have you here, Dean. I have to tell you something. You've saved my life this week. Oh, I was so depressed with all this crap that's going on in the world. I sat down to read the book, and I cannot put it down, and everybody in my office is screaming at me, you've got to do this. I said, wait, just another page or two. It's that good. This is a great one. I'm really enjoying it. And I got to ask you, what do you do? Does this come to you out of the muse? Do you sit down? Do you plot? What a brain you have. Talk to me. You or the brain or the muse? What's the story? How do we get where we get with you?
Well, I do have a strange brain. I'll acknowledge that. And I don't outline or anything. I used to many years ago. And then I stopped and I just said, I'm going to take a premise, a little idea for the story, and a couple of characters I really like, and let the characters grow and tell us where the story goes. And I've done that ever since. In the case of Devoted, it's motivated by some thinking about dogs, because I've had 3 golden retrievers that were just my wife and I, the loves of our lives, and they've changed our lives so dramatically. And I became fascinated with dogs and the human-dog bond. And many years ago, I wrote a novel called Watchers, which features a major dog that has something like human intelligence, because it came out of a laboratory where there was enhanced intelligence experiments. But I thought, I don't want to write a sequel. I don't want to write a prequel. I want to write a book that says maybe it doesn't take a lab to do this. Maybe why this would happen is because humans and dogs are evolving together. We've been together for 100,000 years, and that would bring changes in the dogs. And it moved on from there. And then, because I work with Canine Companions for Independence, my wife and I have for 30-some years, they have, within recent years, instead of doing dogs just for people, assistance dogs, just for people with paraplegic or quadriplegic problems, they started doing them also for autistic children. And one of these socializing dogs can take all the problems of autistic behavior away. The emotional meltdowns, the inflexible behavior, they just simply go. And it's mysterious in a way. And so that's the 2 elements that brought me together. What if, on this idea, what if these dogs are becoming something more than dogs and living secretly among us? And what is it about a dog-human bond that can even take an autistic child and not make him unautistic anymore, but can make his behavior much better and much calmer? And then the other elements just start falling together. There has to be bad guys. And in this book, there are quite a few of them.
To say the least. I have to say 2 things. One is, as the mother of the late, great golden retrievers, Toto and Asta, and don't talk to me about their names. My daughter named them. They were the great loves of my life. But I also have an autistic nephew, and I have to say, this really struck home for me. Maybe that's why I'm so into it, because I've seen how dogs do have an enormous effect on autistic children, at least to my nephew. And it's been really interesting to watch how we can work with him, with the dogs, more than sometimes, obviously, with people. So you really hit on, I think, a great story and a great plot line. You've been called a literary juggler. That, I think, was the Times of London who said that about you. I get that. I'm curious as to whether you agree in that juggler, thing that they're calling you. Is that what a good storyteller does? Juggles plot, characters, ideas, emotions?
Well, it's partly they were talking about my mixing of genres. And when I first started doing that, I would take a suspense novel and put humor in it. And publishers would say, you can't do that because it won't be suspenseful then. And I always said, look, if you can laugh with the characters, they're more human, and then we care about them more. And if I introduced a little scientific, sort of science fiction element, minor, or a little fantasy element into it, a little thing of the supernatural or something, and sometimes I would have a love story. And for many years, I got a lot of resistance on that. And now it's done all the time. And I think that's partly what the Times meant, that I was juggling all these different balls. But it also is character and story. For me, character comes first. If the characters you fall in love with or you find really intriguing, in the case of a villain, terrifying, then the story works. But if the characters are bland, even the best story isn't going to work very well.
That takes me to something about publishing. I'm curious as to what you think about it, because you fought it all the way. The lines have always been drawn in publishing, and it's very hard to break out, particularly in these times where everybody becomes in their genre. All their books have to be about the same. We're selling. You fought that, and I think you won. But when you're one of the rare ones who've broken the rules and made that your genre. Do you wish that more writers would fight for their rights and that the publishing houses would be more amenable to breaking rules?
I sort of understand why it is the way it's been, because by labeling you, they can put you in a slot and identify the people who like to read in that slot. But it also immediately limits you to what you can write. And I never wanted to be limited. As a reader, I read in every genre. I read literary fiction, which is to me another genre. And I wanted to write in them anytime I wanted to and mix them up in any way I wanted to. I say to young writers, even today there would be some resistance to the way I do it, but much less than there was then. But it still is that if you were to write a novel about a bricklayer and it was a success, they'd want 40 novels about a bricklayer. And I say to young writers, you look at my career from the outside, and it looks like this nice, smooth arc that went very well up into the stratosphere. But in fact, it was a struggle all the way. And every time you do something different, it becomes a new struggle. And what you have to do is recognize that and embrace it. That is part of what will make it challenging. And if it isn't challenging, you won't be wanting to do it for the rest of your life. I can't imagine writing the same book over and over again for 50 years. So that was never a choice. But I'm with a publisher now that hasn't called me out once. I sort of suppose that when I delivered this book, and I'm saying there's this race of dogs that live among us, as intelligent as we are, they have evolved this way, but they're secret, and they call themselves the Mysterium. And they have to communicate because an intelligent species needs communication. But dogs don't have the vocal apparatus, so they communicate by telepathy. And I thought, now here's a time when this publisher or editor is going to say, no, that's too far out, because that's kind of the thing I encounter. But it never happened. And I was all prepared to argue, elephants, when one dies, they come from 100 miles and further, and they gather around the dying elephant. Now, how do they know that? They don't have newspapers for elephants, and they don't have phones that they can call each other on. So there's something telepathic there, where if you've ever watched a great flock of birds suddenly change direction, every single one in the same instant, that isn't instinct. That is some form of communication. So I expected to be called out on it this time, but I wasn't. And you just have to resist the urge to buttonhole you. And if you do resist it, you're going to have much happier time writing your books. These days, it's a tough market out there, so people feel even more constrained. They feel like they have to please the publisher's desire to limit them. And but it has always, to some extent, been that way, and you just have to go with it, do what you need to do, and hope for the best.
I like a guy who's a fighter, and that certainly obviously is you, because your books are, a cut above and a whole lot different, and I'm sure that's because you did fight. When you write, Dean, is that something you have to do? Is it something you want to do because you want to appeal to a reader? Who are you writing for? Are you writing for you to purge something? You're writing for the reader? You're writing for D, all the above?
It is sort of all the above, but you start out writing for yourself. And I think most writers do. I had a very unpleasant childhood. We were very poor. My father was a violent alcoholic with considerable problems. And books were my escape. They were not just escape, but they also taught me that not every family was like ours, that behind closed doors, other families were very much different. And that was eye-opening to me as a child, where you think your experience is common or whatever. And so partly I started writing just to express myself, to get out there. Then when you find out that other people may relate to what you write and may find it interesting, that's really a boost to the ego. You say, wow, this is cool. And then with me, I was writing and selling a little bit before it even dawned on me this might be a way to make a living, because I wasn't making much of a living by selling short stories or a first couple of paperback. But then I began to say, this can grow. And I was seeing people that did make a living at it, and So then I was writing to make a living, but that never becomes the primary thing. If it was, I would have stopped years ago because I've made everything I would need to have made for the rest of my life. And so you keep doing it for, it's sort of partly, it sounds phony, but it's not. It's partly the giving back. You think about the writers who changed your life when you were growing up and gave you hope, and you think, gee, I'd love to do that for somebody else. And that becomes an important part of why you keep doing it. And just also, the older you get, the more you do it. I used to think when I was young and stupid, and I was stupid well into middle age, but when I was young and stupid.
Sorry.
Yeah. When I was young and stupid, I thought there was a limited number of tricks, and when you knew them about writing, it would become easy. Well, in fact, the language is beautiful and complex, and storytelling has infinite variety, so there's never an end to the tricks you can learn. And that's what makes it and continues to make it so much fun. You challenge yourself by doing something you've not done before and see if you can pull it off. Those days at the keyboard aren't like work, they're like play.
They're like play. I wanted something came up. I was looking at your Twitter feed. You guys, your publisher, your new publisher, it's Amazon, right? .com you've gone with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We should probably talk about that in a minute. But the point being that they sent me, of course, a synopsis of the book, their elevator speech on it. But you went a different way. I have to read. This is who he is, guys, in real life when he's not writing for books. And you write, a loving mother. This is your version from Twitter. A loving mother, gifted child, amazing dog, and several vicious villains. Sorry, no dinosaurs. You're a character. I love that. I just wanted to put that into the interview. That made me laugh. But here you are. You've got young Woody Bookman, the autistic child, the golden retriever kid. They're the good guys. There it is. A dog and a kid on the autistic spectrum, some might simply dismiss. They're your good guys. What does that say about you, Dean, and your thoughts on humanity? Maybe nothing, maybe something, but it is interesting.
Well, I've been writing for a number of years. I've been including people with disabilities in the fiction. Mm-hmm. And it's not particularly noble reason, but because we've worked with Canine Companions for Independence for so long, I have met literally hundreds of people with severe disabilities, and I've been impressed that I was head of a writers' organization. I won't say what it was or anything else, with almost 500 members, and as president of it, I was getting daily 20, 30 voicemails a day. Complaints about my publisher is doing this to me, my agent is doing this to me, and just terribly, terribly upset. And none of the complaints were anything different than what everybody goes through. And none of them were life-threatening. None of them were even life-distorting. They're just things you deal with and you move on. And finally, my wife and I were at a long weekend event with CCI, and there were hundreds of people with disabilities there. And I came home from that, and there were 40 messages from writers on my machine. And I listened to them, and I thought about that weekend with the disabled people, not one of whom complained about their disabilities. They were excited to have their assistance dogs. They were out there trying to make the most of their lives they could. And here was people who have very little to complain about, complaining ceaselessly. And I quit as president. I just wrote and said, I love you all, but here's where I was this weekend. And this is the difference. You have to deal with these problems in life, and they aren't going to wreck your life. You'll learn to deal with them. You'll get past them. The career will go on. And it's a lot different to not have the use of your legs. And believe it or not, I had a few responses saying, no, it's all relative. Having no legs is no worse than my not having the right agent. And I thought, no, it is. It's actually much worse. And around that point, I started also realizing that people with severe disabilities only show up in fiction if the whole novel is about them and their disability. And so I started thinking, this is material nobody's using. So in One Door Away from Heaven, I have a young girl with some physical deformities that limit her, and I've had Down syndrome characters and so forth. And it's challenging, it's interesting to try to get into the mindset of that kind of person and do them justice, not in a story about them as some victim, but just as they're people in the world, and they belong in a suspense novel as surely as anyone else does.
You know, it's interesting to me. I like you, I work a lot with people with disabilities, and I find, I always say they're God's angels, particularly autistic kids with Down syndrome. They see no evil. They see no bad. Their point of view is always so much better than we who they say have no disabilities. I think we have far more. I just thought I'd point that out. And maybe that's one of the reasons that it's fun to read your stuff and it's intriguing to read your stuff. I want to talk to you about cliche, because it's real easy to go that cliche route, particularly if you've been writing for a long time. I think you can kind of fall into it, and yet you don't. What's the secret to not creating characters, particularly villains, who become cliches?
It's, I think you first, I've never been asked that, and it's a very good question because it makes me think about this in an interesting way. I think first you have to be scrupulous about keeping cliches out of the language itself that you use to write in, that you always have to be looking for a new way to say something, to use metaphor, simile, other imagery in a fresh and inventive way. And when you see yourself using a cliched phrase, you have to scrub it out immediately and find something fresh to say about it, or to a fresh description of that. And when you do that, that's for me, it's part of the fun of this. Ours is a beautiful language, and it offers huge opportunities to use it. And unfortunately, a lot of people have been taught minimalist writing, where you don't use metaphor, you don't use simile. And a lot of young writers actually find these things odd to look at or read. And I think this is like if you were a carpenter and you said, okay, I'm going to build all this beautiful cabinetry. I'm not going to use a saw. I'm not going to use a drill. I'm not going to use an awl. And in fact, you're not going to build beautiful cabinetry because you're giving away all your tools. And I try to say to young writers, stay away from that minimalist thing. Once you start thinking in fresh language and staying away from cliches, then you also start automatically thinking in the same terms about character. Who is this character, and what is interesting or different about them? And not just, oh, he's a lawyer, so what are lawyers like? Every one of us is a distinct individual, and that's what makes fiction interesting if we can portray that. When I knew I was going to write scenes from a dog's point of view, I said, okay, how is this going to work? And I had to think, what about Kip is going to be the central difference between him and the human characters? And even between him and the good human characters. And it came to me pretty quickly that the difference is going to be dogs cannot lie. And then I thought, well, I pretty much know that from having had dogs. You know, they're total innocents. But why can't dogs lie? And then it came to me because dogs' sense of smell is so incredible. It's 20,000 times what ours is, or in some breeds up to 1 million times our sense of smell. Dogs take in through their noses more than we take in through all 5 senses combined, magnitudes more. And we produce pheromones with all our emotions. We distinctly to anger, to love, to fear, and dogs smell that. So dogs know when we're deceiving them. And once I got that handle on the character, I thought, nobody has probably ever written about a dog this way. And therefore, this is not going to be a cliche delivery of a dog. I think that's how you do it, and you do that same thing with human beings. You look for what is essential to that person as a person, not as the type you're writing about.
I have to say, interesting that you brought it up. Excuse me. Words. I always say that there are writers who tell great stories, and then there are writers who write brilliant lyric words, and then there are the writers who do both. That would be you. And there are so few of them around these days. And I'm with you, by the way, on this minimalist stuff. You know, I'm sure it has its place. It's being taught in schools, and I think that's very limiting to anybody's imagination long term or ability to write long term. So I'm really thrilled to hear you go down that road, because I think that's. I often wonder why people aren't reading as much fiction, and I'm wondering whether it's because it's become so simplified, you know?
I totally think so. I will mention no names, but a lot of what gets promoted the most in terms of popular fiction, but I'm afraid it's also true in literary fiction, is some of the stuff that is so blandly written. Other things seem to become more important than the writing itself in terms of why it's being published. And I think that readers just get bored with it. I've been worried about this for a long time, and I wish publishers would push writers harder, or I wish writers. I almost hate to say this because I think there's value in education, but I think too often that writing courses, as they're taught these days, do not teach writers to write. They teach them to do something else that is below writing fiction, that tries to turn writing fiction into writing a kind of heightened nonfiction. And I think that's deadly. And I think it has infected why people have turned away from reading so much. When I was growing up, most writers I read could really write a sentence, and they could keep you gripped by the power of the words themselves. And there was one after another like this, and now I find it something that you don't find that often, and I think it's very sad.
I so agree with you. And what they're teaching in school is to take away, not to create. What's that? I mean, what is that? Whatever. Which part of the story is the most fun for you to write?
It always it varies in every novel, and usually it does have to do with character viewpoint. If I have a character who I find particularly fun to listen to, the writing goes more easily, and I am more charmed. I remember when I started the first Todd Thomas novel, and I heard his voice so clearly in the first page that I knew that this was going to be something special. I didn't know it was going to be 8 books before I finally stopped. Excuse me, but listening to a character who's fun to listen to, Woody is fun to listen to in this novel. I think his interior life, even though he hasn't spoken in 11 years, is so amusing and complex and interesting that I always was eager to see what Woody was going to be thinking and doing in this. So for me, the fun part is getting in the head of the character that I would like to know in real life, and then just letting them go.
How about what's torture?
What's torture?
Maybe none.
Yeah, sometimes, there is. I do write. I don't write a lot of gore. Some people think I do. I remember when Watchers came out many years ago, the book signing, somebody said to me, "Oh, I love your books, but the gory part." And I said, "Wait, I don't really write gore. I don't describe entrails and blood and all that kind of thing." And they said, "Oh no, you're seeing the gory scene in which this woman is killed." And I said, "How long do you think the murder is?" And, "Oh, it goes on for pages." And I said, "No, it's one sentence." And I opened the book and showed them the sentence, and I said, everything leading, that's the one sentence that deals with the murder, but everything leading up to it is anticipation that it could happen. And that's worse than describing it in infinite detail. But sometimes you do have to do a little more. There's some pretty grotesque moment or two in this book, but it's necessary to portray evil as what it really is. And I never want to underplay evil. I don't want you to see an evil character as playful or fun. I want you to be repelled by that character. I also write evil characters I make them fools. The characters in this book are scary, these bad guys, but they're also foolish. Because evil is a foolish choice. It will work in the short term, never in the long term. So if I can show you that evil character as being somewhat of a fool, that you can be amused by them. These assassins for hire in this book are pretty amusing. They don't know it. They think they're very deadly serious people, but there's a side of them that's amusing. That takes the glamour away from evil if you can laugh at it. And it doesn't make it any less scary, strangely enough. But it does take the glamour away, and I never want to be in a position of glamorizing evil, where somebody says, "Oh, that character is so cool," when I don't mean for that character to be cool. I mean for Kip to be cool or Woody to be cool, but never the Lee Shackett villain in this book.
I want to ask you about this. The title, Devoted. I thought that was so interesting. I was thinking about the word devotion. You know, it's not a word that we use a lot these days, right, Dean? I mean, really, think about it. Loyalty, extreme loyalty. So tell us about you and the dogs and devotion. For the record, did your publisher give you any flack on your title, Devoted? Maybe too girly for a murder suspense kind of guy like you?
You know, it was strange. We went, everybody comes up with titles if they think that something isn't quite titled right. And initially I was a little vacillating on titles on this. I can't even remember, but I came up with a very short list of alternate titles. And we had a phone conversation, agents, editors, publisher, and me, and went through it. And one of my agents said that she thought Devoted was by far the best title for this. And everybody, after they thought about it for a minute or so, agreed. So there was no struggle with it, because it does apply to the book so well. The mother is devoted to her son, the son to the mother, the dog to both of them to the dog. And devotion to other people becomes really what the theme of the book becomes. And it leads to a changed world at the end of the book. So, it's a little risky as a title, but on the same time, I think in our world where we're seeing less, or we have been up until recently, being less and less of devotion people to each other, maybe it has an exotic appeal too.
No, I thought it was fascinating, and it got me going, so that's why I asked the question. Listen to me. The bottom line in all of this is, here you are. Do you ever just want to say, I'm done? I've had it. No more. Goodbye. It's been swell.
I think my druthers would be just to fall dead into the keyboard. No time soon. But I do like what I do, and I have enjoyment out of it. And, I've been doing it so long that I don't know what else I would do. I'm not a guy that likes to sit by the pool with an umbrella drink. This is... I've said before that talent is a gift. It's a grace. It's unearned. You're born with it. Some people are born to be the most amazing basketball players you've ever seen. I was born to be an okay writer, but it's what counts in that point is that grace you've been given. I think there's an obligation to do the most you can with what you've been given.
And you're humble. Don't say, okay, I'm not letting you get away with that one. I got a second left, so I have to ask you this. This is my Barbara Walters question, and I hope you don't mind. If you had your choice, and there were only two, would you come back as autistic or as a dog?
I would come back as a dog, because I am so close to dogs. I've often wondered what it is like to be a loved dog. I wouldn't want to be an abused dog, but I would like to see the world through a dog's altered senses. I'd like to know what that's like. If I came back as a dog, I'd spend less time smelling poop. But otherwise, I think I would do much of what my dog does, because she's so in tune with the world and nature in a way that human beings aren't. And I think I would find that fascinating.
You are a delight. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.
Nice to talk with you. Have a great one.
Same here.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care of yourself.
Okay, will do.
Bye-bye.
You too. I've been speaking with author Dean Koontz. His latest suspense novel is Devoted. For more information on Mr. Koontz, visit his website at deankoontz.com. Visit him on Twitter at Dean Koontz. And to purchase the book, visit Amazon.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at hallicasserjayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.